The thunder rolled across the vast New Mexico sky as Nora Jenkins clutched the reins of her frightened horses, the wagon wheels spinning perilously close to the edge of Whisper Creek Bridge. It was 1876, and the spring floods had come early to Abiquiu, turning the normally placid creek into a raging torrent that threatened the rickety wooden structure beneath her. Nora had been warned not to cross during the storm, but the medicine in her wagon couldn't wait. Her father was dying back at their homestead, and the bottles of laudanum she'd purchased from the town doctor were his only hope for comfort in his final days. At 22, she was all he had left in this world, and she wouldn't fail him now. "Easy, boys," she called to the team of horses, their eyes rolling white with terror as another crack of lightning split the sky. The bridge groaned beneath her, the sound lost beneath the rumble of thunder and rushing water. She was halfway across when she felt it, the sickening shift of wood giving way. The center planks of the bridge splintered with a sound like gunshots, and suddenly Nora was tilting, sliding, the wagon lurching violently as the horses screamed in panic. "Help!" she cried out, knowing it was futile. No one would be fool enough to be out in this storm, and the nearest ranch was miles away. The bridge collapsed inward, folding like a house of cards. Nora's wagon tipped nearly vertical, and she lost her grip on the reins. She was falling, tumbling toward the churning water below when a strong hand caught her wrist. "Hold on." A deep voice commanded. Through the driving rain, Nora looked up to see a man reaching through the rails of the bridge's remaining section, his body stretched precariously over the gap. His hat was gone, dark hair plastered to his forehead, but his grip was iron. "I can't," she gasped as her body dangled over the raging current. "Yes, you can," he insisted, reaching his other hand down. "Grab hold. I won't let you fall." Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Nora swung her free arm up and caught his hand. With a powerful heave, he pulled her upward, dragging her through the gap between the rails until she collapsed against his chest on the solid portion of the bridge. Her wagon wasn't so fortunate. With a final groan of wood and metal, it plunged into the creek below, disappearing beneath the muddy torrent along with her father's medicine. "No," she cried, lunging toward the edge, but the stranger's arms locked around her waist. "Don't," he said against her ear, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The rest of this bridge won't hold much longer." As if to prove his point, another section broke away, splashing into the water only feet from where they huddled. "My horses," Nora sobbed, watching as the frightened animals struggled against their harnesses in the water below. "They've broken free," the man said, already pulling her to her feet. "Come on, we need to move." Nora allowed herself to be guided toward solid ground, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. The rain continued to pour, but she barely noticed it now. All she could think about was her father waiting for medicine that would never arrive. When they reached the shore, she turned to look at her rescuer properly for the first time. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind. Despite the circumstances, his blue eyes held a calm steadiness that somehow made her racing heart slow its frantic pace. "Thank you," she managed, her voice catching. "You saved my life, Mr. Forrester," he replied, running a hand through his soaked hair. "Flynn Forrester, Nora Jenkins," she said, extending a trembling hand. "I don't know how to repay you." Flynn Forrester's mouth curved into the barest hint of a smile as he took her hand. "Let's start by getting you somewhere dry before you catch your death." He glanced at the sky, which showed no signs of clearing. "My cabin's about a mile north. Can you walk that far?" Nora thought of her father, waiting alone in their homestead on the other side of the creek, and her chest tightened with anxiety. "I need to get home. My father is ill, that's why I was crossing. The medicine," "There's no crossing that creek tonight," Flynn interrupted gently but firmly. "Not with the bridge gone. We'll have to wait until morning when the rain stops, then I can help you find another way." Fresh tears mixed with the raindrops on Nora's face as the reality of her situation sank in. "He needs me," she whispered. Flynn's expression softened. "I understand, Miss Jenkins, but you can't help him if you drown trying to cross that creek. Come morning, I promise we'll find a way to get you home." Nora knew he was right, though it did nothing to ease the ache in her heart. With a defeated nod, she allowed Flynn Forrester to lead her away from the ruined bridge and toward shelter. Flynn's cabin was modest but sturdy, a testament to skilled hands and practical thinking. A small corral stood empty beside it, his horse presumably in the attached lean-to stable, sheltered from the storm. Inside, it was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchen area, and a curtained-off section that Nora presumed was his sleeping area. "Sit by the fire," Flynn instructed as he stoked the dying embers back to life. "I'll find you something dry to wear." Nora perched on the edge of a chair, suddenly acutely aware of how her soaked dress clung to her body. She crossed her arms over her chest, shivering despite the growing warmth from the fireplace. Flynn disappeared behind the curtain, returning moments later with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that would clearly swallow her whole. "They'll be too big, but they're warm and dry," he said, handing them to her. "You can change behind the curtain. I'll make some coffee." "Thank you," Nora murmured, taking the clothes with grateful hands. She hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Forrester, may I ask what you were doing at the bridge in such weather?" A shadow passed over Flynn's features, so brief she almost missed it. "I was tracking a mountain lion that's been taking calves from my herd. Trail led near the creek. Then I heard your horses." Nora nodded, accepting his explanation, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. She retreated behind the curtain to change, struggling with the wet buttons of her dress, with fingers still numb from cold and fear. In Flynn's oversized clothes, cinched at the waist with a piece of rope, Nora emerged feeling marginally better. Her wet hair hung in tangled waves down her back, and she tried her best to wring the moisture from it. Flynn glanced up from the stove, where he was stirring something in a pot that smelled wonderfully of beans and bacon. If he found her appearance amusing, he didn't show it. Instead, he poured a cup of coffee and pressed it into her hands. "Drink," he said. "It'll warm you from the inside." Nora took a sip, wincing at the bitterness but grateful for the heat that spread through her chest. "Do you live here alone, Mr. Forrester?" she asked, looking around the cabin that showed no evidence of a woman's touch. "Flynn," he corrected. "And yes, just me and occasionally my brother when he passes through." He stirred the pot again. "What about you? You mentioned your father, but is there no one else who could have made the trip to town for his medicine?" Nora shook her head. "It's just the 2 of us since my mother passed 5 years ago. We have a small homestead about 6 miles east of town." She stared into her coffee cup, watching the dark liquid swirl. "My father has consumption. The doctor says he doesn't have long." Flynn's expression softened with genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. My own father passed from the same disease when I was 15. "It's a cruel way to go," Nora said softly. "It is," Flynn agreed. He dished up 2 bowls of the fragrant stew and set one before her along with a chunk of bread. "Eat. You'll need your strength for tomorrow." They ate in companionable silence, the sound of rain on the roof and the crackle of the fire the only interruptions. When they finished, Flynn took their bowls to a wash basin and began to clean up. "You can take the bed," he said without looking at her. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Flynn said firmly, though not unkindly. "You've had a rough day, Miss Jenkins, and tomorrow won't be any easier." Too exhausted to argue, Nora thanked him and retreated behind the curtain. The bed was narrow but comfortable, the sheets clean and smelling faintly of pine and something uniquely male that she assumed was Flynn's scent. Despite her worry for her father and the trauma of the day, exhaustion claimed her quickly, and she fell into a deep sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through a small window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she was wearing men's clothing. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat bolt upright with a gasp. "Father," she whispered, throwing back the covers. When she emerged from behind the curtain, Flynn was already dressed for riding, his hat in his hands. "Good morning," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I've been out to check the creek. The water's dropped some, but the bridge is completely gone. There's a ford about 3 miles upstream that we might be able to cross if the levels keep dropping." Nora pushed her tangled hair from her face. "I need to go now. My clothes, are they dry?" Flynn nodded toward a chair where her dress was laid out, still slightly damp but wearable. "You should eat first," he said, gesturing to the plate of bacon and biscuits on the table. "I don't have time. You won't help your father by arriving half-starved and exhausted," Flynn interrupted. "Eat. I'll saddle the horses." Nora wanted to argue but knew he was right. While Flynn went outside, she changed back into her dress behind the curtain, grateful that it was at least mostly dry. She quickly braided her hair, ate a few bites of breakfast, and was ready when Flynn returned. "Your dress is still damp," he noted with a frown. "It's fine," Nora insisted. "We need to go." Outside, 2 horses were saddled and waiting, a sturdy black gelding and a smaller bay mare. Flynn helped Nora mount the mare, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "She's gentle," he assured her. "Her name's Pepper. You're lending me your horse." Flynn shrugged as he swung up onto the gelding. "Can't very well have you walking, can I?" As they rode, Nora stole glances at her rescuer. In the daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so. His jawline was strong beneath a day's growth of beard, and his hands on the reins were calloused but deft. He rode with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Have you lived in Abiquiu long?" she asked, breaking the silence. 5 years, Flynn replied. "Came out from Missouri after the war. Wanted open spaces and fewer memories." "You fought in the war?" Nora asked, though she could see the answer in the set of his shoulders and the distant look that sometimes entered his eyes. Flynn nodded but didn't elaborate. "What about you?" "You're not from around here originally." "Pennsylvania," Nora said. "My father brought us west after my mother died. He thought the dry air might help his lungs." She laughed without humor. "It didn't." They rode in silence for a while longer before Flynn spoke again. "When we reach the ford, let me test it first. Spring floods can change the riverbed. What looks solid might not be." Nora nodded her agreement, grateful for his caution even as anxiety for her father gnawed at her insides. When they reached the ford, Flynn dismounted and handed her his reins. "Wait here," he instructed before wading into the water to test its depth and current. Nora watched him with her heart in her throat. The creek was still swollen and fast-moving, though not as violent as it had been the night before. Flynn moved cautiously, testing each step before committing his weight. When he was about halfway across, his foot suddenly slipped, and he went down to his waist in the rushing water. Nora cried out in alarm, but Flynn quickly regained his footing and continued his careful crossing. When he reached the other side, he was soaked to the chest but otherwise unharmed. "It's passable," he called back to her, "but tricky in the middle. Follow exactly where I went and keep a tight rein on Pepper. I'll be right here if you need help." Taking a deep breath, Nora urged Pepper forward. The mare was hesitant at first, but stepped into the water obediently. The cold current swirled around Nora's legs, making her gasp, but she kept her focus on the path Flynn had taken. When she reached the deeper section where Flynn had slipped, Pepper snorted in alarm as the water rose higher on her legs. Nora leaned forward, murmuring encouragement, her eyes locked on Flynn, who stood ready on the opposite bank. "That's it," he called. "Keep her steady. You're almost through the worst of it." The mare took another step, and suddenly the current caught her, pushing her sideways. Nora felt herself sliding in the saddle and grabbed frantically for the mare's mane. Flynn was in the water in an instant, catching Pepper's bridle and steadying her. "I've got you," he said, his eyes meeting Nora's. "Both of you, just hold on." With Flynn guiding them, they made it through the deepest part of the ford and up onto the opposite bank. Once on solid ground, Nora slumped in the saddle, relief washing over her. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaky. Again, Flynn's lips quirked in a half-smile. "Seems to be becoming a habit, Miss Jenkins." Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling back. "Nora," she said. "Please call me Nora." Flynn's expression softened. "Nora, then." They remounted and continued their journey, both of them wet and cold but determined. As they rode, Flynn asked about her father's condition, listening attentively as she described the progressive worsening of his cough and the doctor's grim prognosis. "The medicine, it doesn't cure him," she explained, "but it helps with the pain and makes breathing easier without it." She couldn't finish the sentence. "We'll get there," Flynn assured her, "and I know a thing or two about consumption from caring for my father. There are teas and steam treatments that can help ease the breathing when medicine isn't available." Nora looked at him with newfound gratitude. "You'd help with that?" "Of course," Flynn said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to extend his aid to a stranger. By midday, they crested a small hill, and Nora pointed to a modest cabin with a small barn and corral nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees. "There," she said, her throat tight with emotion. "That's home." As they approached, Nora searched for signs of activity: smoke from the chimney, movement at the windows, but the homestead was still and silent. Fear clutched at her heart as she urged Pepper into a trot. "Father!" she called as she dismounted and ran to the door, not waiting for Flynn. The cabin was dim and smelled of sickness when she entered. Her father lay in his bed by the fireplace, which had burned down to cold ashes. For one terrible moment she thought they were too late. Then William Jenkins stirred and opened his eyes. "Nora," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I thought, the storm." "I'm here, Father," she said, rushing to his bedside and taking his thin hand in hers. "I'm so sorry I didn't come back last night. The bridge collapsed and I couldn't cross." William Jenkins' eyes widened with alarm. "You weren't hurt?" "No, I'm fine." "A man saved me, Mr. Forrester. He's outside." As if on cue, Flynn appeared in the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. "Sir," he said with a respectful nod toward the bed. William studied the tall stranger with fevered eyes. "You saved my daughter." "She's a brave woman," Flynn replied. "I just happened to be there when she needed a hand." Nora rose from her father's bedside. "The fire's gone out and he needs water. I need to let me," Flynn said, already moving toward the cold fireplace. "You stay with your father." While Nora tended to her father, Flynn efficiently rekindled the fire, fetched water from the well outside, and even located the herbs he'd mentioned for a steam treatment. Within an hour, the cabin was warm again, and William Jenkins was breathing a little easier as he inhaled the steam from a bowl of hot water infused with pine and horehound. "The medicine," William rasped between breaths. "Did you get it?" Nora exchanged a glance with Flynn before answering. "I had it, father, but it was lost when the bridge collapsed. My wagon went into the creek." William's face fell, but he tried to hide his disappointment. "It's all right, daughter, you're safe. That's what matters." "I can ride back to town for more," Flynn offered. "The doctor might have another bottle." "We can't afford it," Nora admitted quietly. "What I lost was purchased with the last of our savings." Flynn's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, William was seized by a violent coughing fit that left specks of blood on his handkerchief. Nora helped him lie back, her face a mask of worry. "I know a few other remedies that might help," Flynn said once William had settled. "If you'll allow me to stay and assist." Nora looked up at him with grateful eyes. "You've already done so much, I can't ask for more." "You're not asking. I'm offering," Flynn said simply. Over the next 2 days, Flynn proved himself invaluable. He repaired the leaky roof that had been neglected due to William's illness, chopped enough firewood to last a month, and hunted fresh meat to make nourishing broths for the sick man. Each evening, he taught Nora how to prepare herbal treatments that seemed to ease her father's symptoms, if only temporarily. At night, he slept in the barn, refusing Nora's offer to take a pallet by the fire in the cabin. "You need your privacy," he insisted, "and I'm used to rougher accommodations than your barn." On the third morning, Nora rose at dawn to find Flynn already up, sitting on the porch step with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the sunrise. She joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the early morning chill. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly. "Staying, helping, you barely know us." Flynn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon where the sun was painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "When my father was dying," he finally said, "we were alone. My brother was away, fighting in the war. There was no one to help me care for him. No one to fix the roof when it leaked or hunt when we needed food." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "I know what it's like to face that burden alone." Nora felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Flynn shrugged, but his expression remained gentle. "It taught me the value of lending a hand when it's needed. That's all I'm doing here." They sat in companionable silence until the sun had fully risen. Then Flynn said, "I need to check on my ranch. The cattle need tending, and I should make sure that mountain lion hasn't been back." Nora's heart sank at the thought of him leaving, though she knew it was unreasonable to expect him to stay indefinitely. "Of course," she said, striving to keep her voice neutral. "You've already done more than enough." Flynn seemed to hesitate, then said, "I won't be gone long, a day, maybe 2, just enough to see to things and bring back supplies." He paused. "If that's all right with you." Relief flooded through her. "Yes," she said, perhaps too quickly. "I mean, we'd welcome your return if it's not too much trouble." The smile that spread across Flynn's face was like the sunrise, slow and warming. "It's no trouble at all, Nora." After breakfast, Flynn prepared to leave, checking his gelding saddle and packing the few belongings he'd brought with him. Nora walked him to the corral, where Pepper watched them with curious eyes. "She's yours until I get back," Flynn said, nodding toward the mare. "In case you need to fetch a doctor." "I couldn't." "You can and you will," Flynn said, echoing his words from that first night. His tone softened. "I trust you'll take good care of her." Nora nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. This man, who had been a stranger just days ago, continued to show her kindness that defied explanation. Flynn mounted his gelding with easy grace. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised, tipping his hat before turning his horse toward the path that led away from the homestead. Nora watched until he disappeared from view, then returned to the cabin where her father awaited. "He's a good man," William Jenkins remarked when she told him of Flynn's temporary departure. "Don't often see his kind anymore." "What kind is that?" Nora asked as she prepared her father's morning tea. "The kind that helps without expecting anything in return," William replied. "The kind that still believes in doing right simply because it's right." He studied his daughter's face. "And the kind that looks at you the way he does." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Father, don't be ridiculous. He's just being kind." William smiled knowingly but said nothing more. The day passed slowly without Flynn's presence. Nora tended to her father, did her chores, and tried not to look too often down the path where Flynn had disappeared. By evening, she found herself sitting on the porch step where they had shared that early morning conversation, watching the sun set and wondering where he was, and if he was safe. 2 days stretched into 3 with no sign of Flynn's return. Nora tried to quell her growing concern, telling herself that he had his own life and responsibilities, that perhaps he had simply decided not to come back after all. But each time she thought of their last conversation, the sincerity in his eyes when he promised to return, she couldn't bring herself to believe he would break that promise without good reason. On the 4th morning, her father's condition took a turn for the worse. His breathing became more labored, and his fever spiked dangerously high. Nora applied cool compresses and prepared the steam treatments Flynn had taught her, but nothing seemed to help. By midday, she knew she needed to fetch the doctor. With trembling hands, she saddled Pepper, just as she'd seen Flynn do, and prepared for the ride to town. "I'll be back as soon as I can," she promised her semi-conscious father. "Just hold on, please." Nora had only ridden a mile from the homestead when she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of town. For a moment, her heart leapt with the hope that it was Flynn, but as the rider drew closer, she recognized the town doctor's buggy instead. "Doctor." Mitchell pulled his buggy to a stop beside her, his aged face creased with concern. "Miss Jenkins, is everything all right, Dr. Mitchell?" Nora gasped, relief flooding through her. "I was just coming to fetch you. My father, he's worse." "I know," the doctor said, surprising her. "Mr. Forrester rode into town last night and told me. He paid for these medicines and asked me to come first thing this morning." The doctor held up a leather medical bag. He seemed quite concerned. "Flynn sent you?" Nora asked, stunned. "But where is he, doctor?" Mitchell's expression turned grave. There was trouble at his ranch. That mountain lion he was tracking killed one of his prize bulls, and his ranch hand was injured trying to drive it off. He couldn't leave the man alone. Nora's concern immediately shifted to Flynn and his injured worker. "Are they all right?" Mr. Forrester seemed unharmed if exhausted, the doctor assured her. "Said he'd been tracking that cat for 2 days straight before it attacked. As for his hand, I patched him up before coming here. He'll recover." They turned back toward the homestead together, the doctor explaining the new medications he had brought and how they differed from what had been lost in the creek. All the while, Nora's mind was on Flynn, imagining him tracking a dangerous predator alone, then caring for an injured man, yet still finding time to ride to town and arrange for the doctor's visit to her father. When they reached the cabin, Dr. Mitchell examined William thoroughly, administered the new medicine, and gave Nora detailed instructions for his care. "This should make him more comfortable," the doctor said as he prepared to leave. "The progression of the disease can't be stopped, but the symptoms can be managed. He's a strong man, Miss Jenkins. He may have more time than we thought." After the doctor left, Nora sat by her father's bedside, watching as the medicine gradually eased his breathing and lowered his fever. By evening, he was awake and lucid enough to take some broth. Flynn sent the doctor. William asked when Nora explained what had happened. "Yes," she replied, still marveling at the fact herself. "And he paid for the medicine. William nodded slowly as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "You should go to him," he said suddenly. "What? Father, no, I can't leave you. I'm feeling better now, thanks to the medicine he provided," William insisted. "And it sounds like he needs help with his injured man." "But Nora," her father interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "That man has done more for us in a few days than anyone has in years. The least we can do is offer help in return." He reached for her hand, his grip still weak but determined. "Besides, I've seen how you look when you speak of him, and I'm not so old that I don't recognize what that means." Nora felt her cheeks flush. "I hardly know him." "Sometimes that doesn't matter," William said with a small smile. "Your mother and I knew each other exactly 3 weeks before we decided to marry. When it's right, it's right." Nora hesitated, torn between her duty to her father and the pull she felt toward Flynn. "What if you need me?" "I'll be fine for a day," William assured her. "The medicine is working, and you can be back by nightfall if you leave at dawn." After further discussion, Nora reluctantly agreed to ride to Flynn's ranch the next morning. She spent the rest of the evening preparing meals that her father could easily warm for himself, and making sure everything he might need was within reach of his bed. She rose before dawn, checked on her sleeping father one last time, and set out on Pepper with the first light of day. The mare seemed to sense where they were going and moved with eager steps along the trail. Dr. Mitchell had given her rough directions to Flynn's ranch, which lay about 8 miles northeast of their homestead. As she rode, Nora tried to quiet the nervous fluttering in her stomach. What would Flynn think of her appearing unannounced at his home? Would he welcome her help, or see it as an intrusion? By mid-morning, she crested a hill and saw the ranch spread out below her, a sprawling operation with a large main house, several outbuildings, a substantial barn, and multiple corrals. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the rolling grassland. It was far more impressive than she had imagined, and for a moment, she felt intimidated by the scope of Flynn's success. As she approached the main house, a dog began to bark, alerting the occupants to her arrival. A moment later, Flynn emerged onto the porch, his expression shifting from wariness to surprise, and then unmistakable pleasure when he recognized her. "Nora," he called, striding toward her as she dismounted. "Is everything all right?" "Your father is doing much better, thanks to you," she assured him quickly. "Dr. Mitchell told us what you did. The medicine is helping him enormously." Relief washed over Flynn's face, followed by a hint of embarrassment. "It was the least I could do." "It was far more than that," Nora said softly. "Father and I can never repay your kindness." Flynn shook his head. "I don't want repayment." They stood looking at each other for a long moment before Nora remembered her purpose. "Dr. Mitchell also told us about your injured ranch hand. I've come to help if I can. I have some experience with nursing, obviously, and I thought you might need an extra pair of hands." Flynn's expression softened into a smile that made her heart skip. "That's very kind of you, Nora. Truth is, we could use the help. Jackson's fever broke this morning, but he's still weak, and I've got cattle to move to the north pasture." He led her into the house, which was larger and more comfortably furnished than she had expected for a bachelor's residence. A middle-aged Mexican woman was working in the kitchen and looked up with interest when Flynn introduced Nora. "This is Maria," Flynn explained. "She keeps house for me and makes sure I don't starve. Maria, this is Miss Nora Jenkins." "The one from the bridge," Maria said with knowing eyes that made Nora blush. "El Señor has spoken of you." Flynn cleared his throat. "Maria, could you show Miss Jenkins where Jackson is resting? She's come to help with his care." "Of course," Maria replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "This way, señorita." As Nora followed Maria down a hallway, she couldn't help but wonder what Flynn had told his housekeeper about her. The thought that he had spoken of her at all sent a pleasant warmth through her chest. Jackson turned out to be a young man of perhaps 19 or 20, with a deep gash on his left arm that had been neatly stitched and bandaged. He was pale but conscious, and seemed both surprised and pleased to have a female visitor. "Madam," he said, attempting to sit up straighter when Maria introduced them. "Mr. Forrester didn't say nothing about a lady common." "He didn't know," Nora said with a smile. "I came to offer help after hearing you were injured." "That's mighty kind," Jackson said, clearly impressed. "Most folks wouldn't ride all this way for a stranger. Mr. Forrester helped my father and me when we needed it," Nora explained. "I'm just returning the favor." Jackson's eyes widened with recognition. "You're the lady from the bridge, the one the boss pulled up when the wagon went down." News traveled fast, apparently. Nora nodded, somewhat embarrassed to be known for such a dramatic incident. "Well, I'll be," Jackson said with a grin. "No wonder he's been in such a good mood since he got back from your place, even with all the trouble with that cat." Before Nora could respond to this intriguing comment, Maria shooed her out of the room, saying the young man needed rest. Back in the kitchen, the housekeeper set Nora to work peeling potatoes for the midday meal while she prepared a soup for the invalid. "The señor, he is a good man," Maria commented as they worked side by side, "but very alone for too long." Nora wasn't quite sure how to respond to this statement, which seemed to carry implications beyond its simple words. "He mentioned a brother," she said cautiously. "She, Nathan. He visits sometimes, but he has his own life in Santa Fe." Maria gave Nora a sidelong glance. "A man needs his own family. A wife, children. The señor has built all this," she gestured around them, "but for what if there is no one to share it?" Before Nora could formulate a response to this rather direct observation, the door opened and Flynn entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He'd clearly been working. His shirt was damp with sweat, and there was dust on his boots and trousers. "How's the patient?" he asked, washing his hands at the kitchen pump. "Awake and talking," Nora replied. "The wound looks clean, no signs of infection." Flynn nodded his approval. "Good. He's young and strong. He'll heal quickly." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you'll stay for the midday meal at least." "Maria's cooking is far better than anything I could offer at your cabin." "I'd like that," Nora said, ignoring Maria's knowing smile, "but I should return to my father before dark." "Of course," Flynn agreed. "I'll ride back with you. I want to check on your father anyway, make sure the medicine is working properly." They ate together at the kitchen table, Maria serving them before tactfully finding tasks that required her presence elsewhere in the house. The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread with butter, and Nora realized how much she had missed properly cooked food in the days since her father's illness had worsened. As they ate, Flynn told her about his ranch, how he'd started with just a small plot of land and a few head of cattle 5 years ago and gradually expanded. Nora, in turn, shared stories of her life in Pennsylvania before the move west and her dreams of someday becoming a schoolteacher. "You'd be good at it," Flynn observed. "You have a natural way of explaining things clearly. I noticed when you were telling me about your father's treatments." Nora smiled at the unexpected compliment. "Thank you. I love children, and there's such a need for education out here." "Abiquiu could use a proper school," Flynn agreed. "Right now, the children are taught in the back room of the church whenever the circuit preacher is in town, which isn't often enough." Their conversation flowed easily, touching on books they had both read, places they hoped to visit someday, and the challenges and rewards of life in the New Mexico territory. Nora found herself laughing more than she had in months, perhaps years, and the worries that had been her constant companions lately seemed to recede into the background. All too soon, it was time to prepare for the return journey to her father's homestead. Flynn insisted on accompanying her, despite her protests that she could find her way alone. "I'd worry the whole time if you rode back alone," he admitted as they saddled their horses. "Besides, I meant what I said about checking on your father." They set out in the late afternoon, the sun still high enough to promise plenty of daylight for their journey. They rode side by side when the trail permitted, their horses falling into a comfortable rhythm together. "Your ranch is impressive," Nora said after they had ridden in companionable silence for a while. "You've accomplished a great deal in just 5 years." Flynn looked pleased by her observation. "It's been hard work, but worth it. Land out here is still affordable, and there's room to grow." "And yet you found time to help strangers in need," Nora said softly. Flynn glanced at her, his eyes warm. "Some things are more important than ranching, Nora." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cooling afternoon air. They rode on, the conversation turning to lighter topics, but Nora was acutely aware of every look, every smile Flynn sent her way. When they reached the homestead, William Jenkins was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the mild weather. His face brightened when he saw the 2 riders approaching. "I see you found him," he called to Nora, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "Technically, she found me," Flynn replied with a smile as he dismounted and helped Nora down from her horse. "How are you feeling, sir?" "Better than I have in a long while," William said. "Thanks to that medicine you sent. You must let me repay you when I'm back on my feet." Flynn shook his head. "No need for that, sir. I'm just glad it's helping." William's eyes moved between Flynn and his daughter, a knowing look in their depths. "Well, at least stay for supper. Nora makes a fine stew when she has the ingredients." Flynn accepted the invitation readily, and soon they were seated around the small table in the cabin, enjoying a simple but hearty meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. William was indeed stronger, able to sit at the table and eat without assistance, though Nora noticed he tired quickly and ate less than she would have liked. After the meal, Flynn insisted on cleaning up while Nora helped her father back to his bed by the fire. When William was settled, Flynn pulled a small package from his saddlebag and presented it to him. "A little something to help pass the time," Flynn explained as William unwrapped a well-worn copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. "I've been wanting to read this," William said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "How did you know?" Flynn shrugged. "Nora mentioned you enjoy reading. I thought you might like something new." William's eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. "Thank you, son. That's thoughtful of you." The term of endearment wasn't lost on either Flynn or Nora. She felt her own eyes growing moist as she watched this man, who had come into their lives by chance, continue to demonstrate such consideration for them both. Later, as the sun began to set, Flynn prepared to leave. "I should get back before dark," he said, though he seemed reluctant to go. Nora walked him to his horse, the evening air cool against her skin. "Thank you for riding back with me and for checking on Father." "It was my pleasure," Flynn said, his voice low. He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to come back tomorrow if that's all right. There are some repairs around the homestead I noticed that need attention." "You don't have to do that," Nora protested. "You have your own ranch to manage." "I want to," Flynn said simply. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw something that made her heart race. "Unless you'd rather I didn't come." "No," Nora said quickly. "I mean, yes, please come. We'd like that. I'd like that." Flynn's smile was slow and warm. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." True to his word, Flynn returned the next day and the next, and the day after that. He brought tools and materials and set about fixing the sagging porch, the leaky roof, and the broken corral fence. In the evenings, he would sit with William, discussing books or current events, while Nora prepared dinner. After they ate, Flynn would read aloud from Tom Sawyer until William grew tired. Each night, Flynn would return to his ranch, and each morning Nora would find herself watching the path for his arrival with growing anticipation. With proper medicine and care, William's condition stabilized. He would never be well, the consumption had progressed too far for that, but he was more comfortable and able to enjoy his days more fully than he had in months. 2 weeks after the bridge collapse, Flynn arrived earlier than usual, carrying a large bundle wrapped in canvas. His expression was serious as he asked to speak with both Nora and her father. Seated at the kitchen table, Flynn unwrapped the bundle to reveal architectural drawings and land surveys. "I've been thinking about your situation," he began. "This homestead is isolated, especially with the bridge gone. The nearest doctor is too far away in case of emergency." William and Nora exchanged confused glances. "I have a proposition," Flynn continued. "There's a small cottage on my property, about a quarter-mile from the main house. It was built for the previous owner's mother, but it's been sitting empty since I bought the place." He spread out the drawings. "It's sound, with 2 bedrooms, a good fireplace, and a porch that gets morning sun. I'd like to offer it to you both." Nora stared at him, speechless. "You want us to move to your ranch?" William asked, his voice careful. Flynn nodded. "The air there is just as dry for your lungs, sir. The doctor could reach you easily." And he glanced at Nora. There would be people around if help were needed. "That's very generous," William said slowly, "but we couldn't possibly accept such charity." "It's not charity," Flynn insisted. "Nora mentioned she was trained as a teacher. Abiquiu needs a school, as we discussed. The cottage could serve as both your home and a schoolhouse, at least until a proper school is built." He looked directly at Nora. "You could fulfill your dream of teaching, be close enough to care for your father, and provide an essential service to the community." Nora's mind raced. It was a perfect solution to so many of their problems, yet she hesitated. "What about this place? It's all we have." "You wouldn't have to sell," Flynn said. "It could wait until you decide if the arrangement works for you, and if it does." He paused, seeming to gather his courage before continuing. "If it does, perhaps we could discuss a more permanent arrangement." The implication behind his words was clear, and Nora felt her cheeks grow warm. William Jenkins looked between his daughter and the rancher, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I think that sounds like a fine plan," William said, his eyes twinkling. "Don't you, Nora?" I need to think about it," Nora stammered, overwhelmed by the offer and its implications. Flynn nodded, looking slightly disappointed but understanding. "Of course. It's a big decision. Take all the time you need." That night after Flynn had gone, Nora sat on the porch steps, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. The practical benefits of Flynn's offer were undeniable, but there was more to consider. Moving to his ranch, accepting his help, would create a bond between them that went beyond friendship or gratitude. And that was the heart of her confusion. She wasn't sure what she felt for Flynn Forrester anymore. Gratitude, yes. Admiration, certainly. But there was something else. Something that made her pulse quicken when he was near and her heart ache when he was gone. The door creaked behind her, and her father joined her on the steps, wrapped in his blanket despite the mild evening air. "You shouldn't be out in the night air," Nora chided gently. "Sometimes a man needs to breathe," William replied, settling beside her. "Like you need to talk." Nora sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I don't know what to do, Father." "Yes, you do," William said softly. "You're just afraid to admit it." What if it's not what I think? What if he's just being kind, offering us the cottage out of pity? William chuckled. Nora, my darling girl, I may be dying, but I'm not blind. That man isn't acting out of pity. He looks at you the way I looked at your mother. Nora felt tears prick her eyes. I barely know him. You know the important things, William countered. You know he's honorable. You know he's kind. You know he works hard and values education. You know he doesn't hesitate to help others, even at risk to himself. He patted her hand. Those are the things that matter in the long run, not how long you've known each other. Nora considered her father's words, finding truth in them she couldn't deny. But what about you? This is your home. Walls and a roof don't make a home, Nora. People do. William's voice was gentle but firm. I'll be at home wherever you are. And I'd rest easier knowing you'll be taken care of after I'm gone. Don't talk like that, Nora protested. We both know my time is limited, William said. It's not something to fear, but it is something to prepare for. He looked out at the darkening landscape. I think Flynn Forrester would be good for you, and I think you'd be good for him. Nora was silent for a long moment, letting her father's wisdom settle into her heart. Finally, she said, I'll tell him yes tomorrow. William smiled. Good. Now help your old father back inside before we both catch our death out here. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Nora found herself watching the path with even more anticipation than usual. When Flynn's familiar figure appeared on horseback, her heart skipped a beat. He approached the homestead with a cautious expression, clearly unsure of the reception he would receive after his proposal the day before. Good morning, he called as he dismounted. Good morning, Nora replied, stepping off the porch to meet him. I'm glad you came. Flynn's expression lightened. You are, Nora nodded, suddenly nervous despite her decision. We've thought about your offer, about the cottage. And, Flynn asked, his voice carefully neutral. We accept, Nora said, if you're still sure it's what you want. The smile that spread across Flynn's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. It's exactly what I want, he said, taking a step closer to her. But I need to be clear about something, Nora. She looked up at him questioningly. When I spoke of a more permanent arrangement yesterday, I wasn't just talking about the teaching position. Flynn took a deep breath. I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but I need you to understand my intentions. Nora's heart pounded in her chest. And what are your intentions, Mr. Forrester? Flynn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her hand in his. From the moment I pulled you through those bridge rails, something changed for me. I can't explain it properly, but I feel like I've been waiting for you without knowing it. Nora's breath caught in her throat. Flynn, let me finish, he said gently. I'm not asking for anything now. I'm simply saying that I hope, with time, you might come to feel for me what I already feel for you. And what is that? Nora whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Flynn's blue eyes were steady on hers. I think I'm falling in love with you, Nora Jenkins. And I'd like the chance to court you properly if you'll allow it. Tears welled in Nora's eyes, but they were tears of joy. I think I'd like that very much, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Flynn's face lit up with such hope and happiness that Nora felt her own heart expand in response. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to refuse, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief, a mere whisper of contact, but it sealed a promise between them that needed no words. The move to Flynn's ranch took place the following week. The cottage was just as Flynn had described, small but comfortable, with solid walls and a sound roof. It sat in a grove of cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade in the heat of the day, and the porch indeed caught the morning sun perfectly. William Jenkins settled into the master bedroom, which had windows on two sides to catch the cross breeze. The second bedroom would serve as Nora's until the proper schoolhouse could be built, at which point it would become the classroom. Word spread quickly through the scattered community that the rancher's cottage would soon house a school. Families with children rode in from miles around to meet the new teacher and enroll their young ones. By the end of the first week, Nora had a list of 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 15, scheduled to begin lessons the following Monday. As promised, Flynn courted Nora with proper respect and patience. He took her on picnics by the creek that ran through his property, taught her to ride properly on one of his gentler horses, and brought her wildflowers he found on his daily rounds of the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit on the cottage porch with William, talking and reading aloud until the stars came out. One evening in late summer, nearly 3 months after the bridge collapse, Flynn invited Nora for a special ride to show her something on the far side of the ranch. Curious, she accepted, and they set out as the afternoon heat began to wane. Flynn led her to a beautiful overlook where the land dropped away to reveal a vista of mountains and valleys stretching to the horizon. A blanket was already spread on the ground with a basket of food and a bottle of wine waiting. "This is lovely," Nora said as Flynn helped her dismount. "How did you find this place?" "I come here to think," Flynn replied, leading her to the blanket. "It helps put things in perspective, seeing how vast the world is." They shared a simple but delicious meal of cold chicken, bread, and fresh fruit as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. The wine was sweet and unfamiliar to Nora, who rarely drank alcohol but pleasant on her tongue. As they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Flynn turned to face her, his expression serious. "Nora," he began, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." She smiled, feeling the same way but suddenly shy about expressing it. "Mine too." Flynn took her hand in his. "I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I feel like I've known you forever." He paused, swallowing visibly. "What I'm trying to say is, I love you, Nora Jenkins. I love your kindness, your strength, your devotion to your father. I love the way you smile when you're talking about books, and how excited you get about teaching your students. I love everything about you." Tears pricked Nora's eyes as the depth of emotion in Flynn's voice washed over her. "I love you too, Flynn, more than I ever thought possible." Flynn's smile was brilliant in the fading light. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Then, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond that caught the last rays of the setting sun. Nora gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. "Flynn, is that a yes?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," Nora breathed, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, of course it's a yes." Flynn slid the ring onto her finger with slightly trembling hands, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that spoke of promise, passion, and a future filled with love. When they returned to the cottage, William was waiting on the porch as if he knew what had transpired. His smile at the sight of the ring on Nora's finger was all the blessing they needed. "I was beginning to think he'd never ask," William teased, his eyes twinkling with happiness despite the pallor of his skin. "You knew?" Nora asked, surprised. "He asked my permission weeks ago," William confirmed. "Said he wanted to be sure you felt the same before he spoke." Nora looked at Flynn with wonder. "You never said anything." Flynn shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to give you time to be sure." William cleared his throat. "Well, now that it's settled, we should discuss the wedding. I'd like to see my daughter married before I'm too weak to walk her down the aisle." The gentle reminder of William's condition sobered the moment slightly, but couldn't dampen the joy the three of them felt. They agreed on a simple ceremony in 4 weeks' time, to be held at the small church in Abiquiu, with a celebration afterward at the ranch. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Nora continued teaching her growing group of students during the day while making wedding arrangements in the evenings. Flynn's housekeeper, Maria, took charge of the food for the celebration, promising a feast that would be remembered for years to come. Flynn's brother, Nathan, arrived from Santa Fe a week before the wedding, bringing with him a beautiful cream-colored dress for Nora that had been their mother's. "She'd want you to have it," Nathan told Nora as she held the dress against herself in wonder. "Flynn's the image of our father, but you remind me of her strong, gentle, and too good for the rascal you're marrying." This last was said with a teasing grin at Flynn, who cuffed his brother playfully on the shoulder. The brothers were similar in build and coloring, but where Flynn was serious and thoughtful, Nathan was quick to laugh and joke. Nora liked him immediately and was grateful for the way he engaged William in long conversations about books and politics, bringing new energy to the cottage. 2 days before the wedding, Nora was fitting the dress with Maria's help when they heard a commotion outside. Running to the window, they saw William collapsed on the porch steps, Flynn kneeling beside him. Nora rushed outside, her heart in her throat. "Father!" William was conscious, but barely so, his breathing labored and his lips tinged with blue. Flynn had already sent a ranch hand galloping toward town for the doctor. "Let's get him inside," Flynn said, lifting William with gentle strength and carrying him to his bed. The next hours were a blur of anxiety as they waited for the doctor to arrive. Nora bathed her father's forehead with cool cloths and helped him sip water when he was able. Flynn stayed by her side, a steady presence in the midst of her fear, when Dr. Mitchell finally arrived. His examination was thorough, but his expression grave when he pulled Nora and Flynn aside. "The disease has reached his heart," the doctor explained quietly. "It's common in advanced cases. I can give him medicine for the pain, but I'm afraid there's little else to be done." "How long?" Nora asked, her voice barely audible. Dr. Mitchell's kind eyes filled with sympathy. "Days, perhaps. A week at most." Nora felt her knees give way, but Flynn's arm was there, supporting her, holding her up when she couldn't stand alone. "The wedding," she whispered. "We'll postpone it," Flynn said immediately. "Your father needs you now." But when they returned to William's bedside and explained the situation, he wouldn't hear of it. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice weak but determined. "The wedding will proceed as planned." "Father, please," Nora began, but William cut her off with a raised hand. "Listen to me, Nora. I may not have long, but I want to see you married to this good man before I go. It's all I have left to give you my blessing and the memory of your father at your wedding." Tears streamed down Nora's face as she took her father's frail hand in hers. "But it won't be what we planned. We can't ask people to celebrate when you're ill." "Life doesn't stop for death, my darling," William said softly. "It goes on as it should, as I want it to for you." Flynn knelt beside the bed. "Sir, we could have a small ceremony here, just family. The minister could come to the cottage." William considered this, then nodded slowly. "That would be acceptable if Nora agrees." Nora looked between the two men who meant everything to her and nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The next day, arrangements were hastily changed. The minister was summoned to the cottage, and only Nathan, Maria, and Dr. Mitchell were invited to attend. The celebration at the ranch was postponed indefinitely. On what should have been the day before her wedding, Nora sat by her father's bedside, reading aloud from his favorite book of poetry. William drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally squeezing her hand when a particular verse moved him. During one of his wakeful periods, he asked her to bring him the small wooden box he kept on his dresser. Inside was a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. "This was your mother's," William said, his voice a whisper. Her grandmother gave it to her on our wedding day. Now I give it to you." Nora took the locket with trembling hands and opened it to find a tiny portrait of her mother on one side and her father on the other. "So we can both be with you tomorrow," William explained, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "And every day after." Nora bent to kiss her father's forehead, her own tears falling onto his sunken cheeks. "I love you so much, Father." "And I love you, my brave, beautiful daughter," William replied. "You have made my life rich beyond measure." The wedding day dawned clear and calm, as if nature itself respected the solemnity of the occasion. Flynn arrived early, dressed in his best suit, his face a mixture of love for Nora and concern for William. The minister came at noon, and with William propped up in his bed, they held the ceremony in his room. Nora wore her cream dress and her mother's locket, her hair simply arranged with a crown of wildflowers Flynn had gathered that morning. As they spoke their vows, Nora held Flynn's hands and felt his strength flowing into her. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn kissed her with such tenderness that fresh tears sprang to her eyes. William watched the ceremony with a peaceful smile, and when it was complete, he beckoned the newlyweds to his bedside. "My gift to you both," he said, reaching beneath his pillow and withdrawing an envelope, "is the deed to our homestead. Flynn, I know you'll make good use of the land. And Nora, this way you'll always have a piece of our first home in the West." Flynn took the envelope with reverent hands. "Thank you, sir. I'll care for it as you would have." "I know you will," William said, his voice growing fainter. "And you'll care for my daughter the same way." "With my life," Flynn promised. William nodded, satisfied, then closed his eyes. "I think I need to rest now." The others withdrew to allow the newlyweds a private moment with William. Nora sat beside her father, holding his hand while Flynn stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders. "Be happy, my darlings," William whispered, his eyes still closed. "That's all a father ever wants for his child." Those were the last words William Jenkins spoke. He drifted into a deep sleep from which he never woke, passing peacefully in the night with Nora and Flynn keeping vigil by his side. They buried him the next day in the small cemetery behind the church in Abiquiu, beneath a cottonwood tree that reminded Nora of the ones that surrounded their first homestead. The service was simple but well attended. In the short time they had lived in the area, William had made many friends among the townspeople and neighboring ranchers. Grief hung heavy in the cottage in the days that followed. Flynn suggested they move to the main house, but Nora wasn't ready to leave the rooms where her father had spent his final days. Understanding her need, Flynn moved his things into the cottage instead, turning the small second bedroom into a temporary office so Nora could keep the master bedroom untouched for a little while longer. At night, they slept in Nora's narrow bed, holding each other close as she cried her grief into his shoulder. Flynn never rushed her healing, never suggested she should be stronger or move on more quickly. He simply held her, listened when she wanted to talk about her father, and gave her space when she needed solitude. Gradually, as summer turned to fall, Nora began to find joy again. Her students, now numbering 15, brought laughter and purpose back into her days. The ranch, with its constant rhythm of work and seasons, provided structure when she felt adrift. And Flynn, her steady, loving husband, was always there with a supportive word or comforting embrace. By the first snowfall, they had moved into the main house, bringing with them the mementos of William that Nora cherished most: his books, his reading glasses, the small portrait of her mother he had kept by his bedside. Flynn had a special bookcase built in their bedroom to house William's collection, a gesture that brought tears to Nora's eyes when she saw it. "He'll always be part of our home," Flynn promised her, "just as he'll always be part of our family. life settled into a pleasant routine. Nora taught during the day while Flynn managed the ranch. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation, often reading aloud to each other from William's books. At night, they discovered the joys of marriage in each other's arms, their love growing deeper and more profound with each passing day. Spring brought new life to the ranch calves in the pastures, wildflowers on the hillsides, and the news that Nora was expecting their first child. "A baby," Flynn whispered in wonder when she told him, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Your father would have been so happy." "He knows," Nora said with certainty. "Somehow I'm sure he knows." Their son, William Flynn Forrester, was born on a crisp October morning in 1877, a healthy, robust baby with his father's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair. Nora held him in her arms and felt her heart, once broken by her father's death, heal completely in the miracle of new life. "He's perfect," Flynn said, his voice choked with emotion as he gazed at his wife and son. "Just like his mother." As little William grew, so did the Forrester ranch and family. A proper schoolhouse was built in Abiquiu the following year, with Nora appointed as the town's official teacher. Flynn's cattle operation expanded, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. When William was 3, he was joined by a sister, Emma Rose, who had Nora's gentle temperament and William Jenkins' love of books. 2 years later, another son, James Nathan, completed their family a boisterous, adventurous child who kept his parents constantly on their toes. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. There were difficulties, of course, drought years that threatened the cattle, a scarlet fever outbreak that closed the school for a month, the normal challenges of raising 3 active children. But through it all, Flynn and Nora faced each day together, their love only strengthening with time and trials. Often, on clear evenings, they would ride together to the overlook where Flynn had proposed, spread a blanket and watch the sunset over the mountains. Sometimes they spoke of the future, making plans for the ranch or the children's education. Other times, they reminisced about the past, including that stormy day when a bridge collapsed and changed their lives forever. "Do you ever think about how many things had to happen exactly as they did for us to find each other?" Nora asked on one such evening, leaning against Flynn's chest as the sky turned gold and crimson before them. "If the bridge hadn't collapsed, if you hadn't been tracking that mountain lion at that exact moment, I think we would have found each other somehow," Flynn replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are just meant to be." Nora smiled, knowing he was right. Their love had been forged in a moment of crisis, but built on a foundation of respect, kindness, and shared values that would have drawn them together under any circumstances. As the last rays of sunlight gilded the distant mountains, Nora turned in Flynn's arms to face him. At 40, he was even more handsome than the man who had pulled her from the collapsing bridge 14 years ago. Silver threaded his dark hair at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his gaze when he looked at her still held the same warmth and love it always had. "Thank you," she said softly. Flynn raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For reaching through those rails and pulling me to safety," Nora replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just that day at the bridge, but every day since. You've been my safe harbor, Flynn, my strength when I had none left." Flynn cupped her face in his hands, his eyes shining with love. "And you've been mine, Nora. You and our children, you're everything to me." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Flynn Forrester kissed his wife with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day, reaffirming a love that had begun in a moment of peril, but would last a lifetime and beyond. And on the gentle breeze that rustled the cottonwoods below, Nora thought she could almost hear her father's approving whisper. "Be happy, my darlings." They were, and they would be for all the days to come.